சிறப்பாகவும் மிகவும் அற்புதமாகவும் பயனுள்ளதாகவும் அமைந்துவிட்டன. இன்று பிற்பகல் நிகழ்ச்சியினரில் திரு கண்ணன் அவர்கள், பேராசிரியர் சுவாமிநாதன் அவர்கள், திரு நாசர் அகமது அவர்கள், திரு ரவி பாரதி அவர்கள், திரு கிருஷ்ணமூர்த்தி அவர்கள், திரு ஜெயராமன் அவர்கள் பேசவிருக்கின்றார்கள். இது தவிர பல்வேறு கல்லூரியைச் சேர்ந்த மாணவர்களும் பேராசிரியர்களும் தங்களுடைய ஆராய்ச்சி கட்டுரைகளை வாசிக்க இருக்கிறார்கள் என்பதை இந்த நேரத்திலே மகிழ்ச்சியுடன் தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கின்றேன். இன்று பிற்பகல் நடக்கிற நிகழ்ச்சியிலே கேள்வி அரங்கமாகவும் விவாத அரங்கமாகவும் ஆராய்ச்சி கட்டுரை வாசிக்கின்ற விதமாகவும் கலந்துரையாடலாகவும் கூட அமைய வேண்டும் என்று நான் விரும்புகின்றேன். திரு கண்ணன் அவர்களை மேடைக்கு வருமாறு அழைக்கின்றேன். திரு கண்ணன், நாசர் கம், பேராசிரியர் சுவாமிநாதன், திரு வேடா அவர்கள், நாசர் கம், ப்ரொஃபசர் சுவாமிநாதன் வாங்க.
Heavy and lunch, delicious lunch. We are to start the afternoon session. We are beginning with Mr. R. Kannan, a lawyer by training. He is formerly with the UN as an ex-political officer in the former Yugoslavia. He is a guest and columnist in Dinamani, The Hindu, and The Frontline. I think we should start reading Dinamani and Hindu to at least hear, but we'll hear his speech before we start reading. We present now Mr. Kannan before you.
Professor Swaminathan, Head of the Department of History, Pachepas College. I beg your pardon. The Controller of Exams, Teachers Recruitment Board. My good friend and colleague, entrepreneur, a student activist, Mr. Nasir Ahmed. A good social activist on the dais here, Mr. Beda. The chairman of the Madras Educational Trust, Mr. Sampath. Mr. Anbarasu, a good friend of mine and a consistent supporter of the Trust's activities. Participants, friends, and others. A hearty welcome to this afternoon session. I must admit that we have been a little dismayed at the not so overwhelming response. This is not so particular with a celebration on the UN in India. I'm sure this must be the case in Africa, in Latin America, in other parts of even perhaps Europe, where organizers must be finding it difficult to get people to listen to the 50th anniversary celebrations of the United Nations. 50 years have gone by, but I do think that the United Nations is still not a popular organization. I've had a number of friends, intellectuals, scholars, and others mention to me, is it the 50th anniversary celebrations of the UN? No, the United Nations organization. It is the United Nations. The headquarters is the organization. There is no such thing as the United Nations organization. I mention this because we are not aware of even the very nomenclature of the United Nations. And that is because most of us, people who are not so old as I am, much younger, like most of you over here, like my good friend Mr. Villalan, Professor Krishnasamy, are not aware of the history behind the founding of the United Nations. The word United Nations was first coined by President Roosevelt of the United States. The year was 1942, when the world was rife with the Second World War. All those nations which had come together to fight Nazism, Italian fascism, and the Japanese aggression were called United Nations by President Roosevelt. It was a conglomeration of nations which were waging war against the three fascist and Nazi powers of the world. Subsequently, conferences took shape. In Tehran in 1943, the foreign ministers of the USSR, the United States, Great Britain, and the Chinese ambassador to USSR got together and for the first time announced that they did feel the need for another organization to promote world peace and to save future generations from the scourge of war. It was not that the earlier institution, the League of Nations, had already died. It was still living. It was still kicking. However, it was kicking itself to death. After the Manchurian aggression of Japan and Hitler's conquest over Poland, the organization could not last longer. It had to close. Its end was near. So the three major leaders meeting somewhere in the Atlantic came away with a declaration to found the United Nations, which was subsequently followed by a meeting at Yalta because there were differences in the composition of the organization and how the General Assembly would have its membership and how the Security Council would be formed, the veto powers, and so on and so forth. Much has been spoken about the Security Council, much has been spoken about the permanent status of the members, and much has been said about India's inclusion into it. I am not going to deliberate on those in this session. Much can be spoken about these things, but I think the decision finally rests with the Committee of Nations. There are only two ways to get into the Security Council: money power or muscle power. The two nations which have those are Germany and Japan. They will make it. When I meant muscle power, it's not the numbers that count. We are 900 million strong, but we may find it difficult to make it. Muscle power in today's context, in the unipolar world, is the power that a country like the United States wields. Let's go back to our discussion. So these differences were resolved. The United Nations came into being after the San Francisco conferences, and our representative from here, from India, was originally from the state of Tamil Nadu. One of the Arcot brothers, the late A. Ramasamy Mudaliar. It is indeed befitting that in the same Madras, we have assembled to commemorate, to celebrate in a befitting manner the 50th anniversary celebrations of the United Nations. I will speak on just one element of the UN today for perhaps 3 to 4 minutes and let you to think on those lines and then hand over the dais to the other participants. In the last 50 years, as the chief of the UNICEF mentioned this morning, like every other organization, this organization has had its failures, successes. But critiques of the UN have been rather harsh because the UN has a budget of $10.5 billion annually. That's a lot of money. One could run several states in the US with that kind of money. And half of that money is spent on peacekeeping. Until 1988, the United Nations launched 13 peacekeeping operations. The first of it was launched, ironically, by the UN's own decision to partition Palestine. The first peacekeeping operation came into place in 1948. It was called UNSO, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization. The second is a very popular one. All of us over here know it. It is the mission in Kashmir, where UN troops would stand as a buffer between the contact lines of the two Kashmiris. That mission and the original mission in Palestine still continue to this date. Later, after 1988, within the last 7 years, the UN has set up 25 peacekeeping operations, twice the number than in the earlier 40 years. The lesson is very clear. In a bipolar world, there was a semblance of balance. The United States and the USSR divided the world between themselves, and the clientele or the client states were willing to listen to them, rightly or wrongly. In a unipolar world where the Berlin Wall had fallen, where the blocks have been broken, and the only superpower left is the United States, a balance is very desperately needed. And that is the work of the United Nations today. In fact, it is pitted, as Professor Kollandaisamy pointed out this afternoon, it is pitted against those who have all the riches with themselves. Its task is to see if those resources could be redistributed. But I believe its crusade for peace, its crusade against war, has not come to an end. And that is why you see a proliferation in its activities in the area of peacekeeping. I'm going to mention 3 peacekeeping areas. In 1992, the month was March, the UN launched 3 major peacekeeping operations in its history. In Cambodia, in Somalia, in the former Yugoslavia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Macedonia. In the last, I happened to be with the UN running the Croatian desk for them. So I could speak with a bit of experience and a personal viewpoint. In the other 2 places, I've had colleagues come over to tell me what had happened there. The mandates in these 3 places were simple. In Somalia, government had broken down, law and order had broken down, tribes were pitted against each other, Syed Barre had fled or died, and tribes were fighting against each other. 15 million people were starving. They had to be rescued from the scourge of death and hunger. The UN was simply asked to go to provide food to them. It did that. It failed because it was prevented from distributing food to those people who needed it very badly. The Security Council authorized, the first time in the history of United Nations peacekeeping, to use force against those who would prevent it from carrying food to those who needed it. And since the UN did not have the resources or the prowess or the strength to carry on these activities, the Security Council tasked the United States to carry out this operation. Now, you must remember that Somalia had been under a Marxist dictatorship for decades. The United States is a principal enemy. The US comes in, carries out a peacekeeping operation, fails, and everybody says the UN has failed. Earlier this year, the UN left Somalia. But the mandate of the UN in Somalia was to provide food. It did that. Several million people were saved. The country is in chaos after the UN has left, but the UN's mandate was not to put the country together. That was not its business. It was the business of Italy, the former colonial power, and those others who were trying to stitch the country back. Let's go back to Cambodia. Cambodia is a success story for the UN. In Cambodia, the UN was asked to take over the reins of administration of Cambodia. For 1 year, it ran Cambodia for the Cambodian parties. Additionally, it had to conduct elections for 47 million people. It did that, succeeded, came out. For 30 years, Cambodians did not have a government. They had a representative, fairly elected government in Cambodia. Because the mandate was clear, the parties had cooperated, it was able to carry out its mandate. In the former Yugoslavia, the mandate was again to provide food. However, without the cooperation of the parties, the UN cannot even do that. It has done that very remarkably well. But again, the task of putting together former Yugoslavia, the task of putting together other republic states which had broken off from the Yugoslavia is not with the UN. It is with the European Union. It is principally with the parties themselves. I had mentioned these to point out that the UN, as a peacekeeping organization, must continue. Peacekeeping is a mechanism by which you contain tensions so that interlocutors can shuttle between one party and the other to spread the message of peace, to fan the message of peace. In conclusion, I would like to suggest, as a former peacekeeping official, things have turned to the worse in Sri Lanka. Maybe it is time to think of an international United Nations peacekeeping force between the Tamil majority areas controlled by rebels and those that are administered by the government. The UN can keep peace so that Tamil civilians or Sinhala civilians need not die further, while both the government as well as the rebels can sit down and put their heads together to see if they can bring out an eventual settlement. For 15 years, more than 50,000 people have been killed there. For 15 years, much blood has been spilt. For 15 years, the Jaffna province has not seen regular electricity, power supply, or water. For 15 years, people have been pitted against peoples. It is time for peace to be given a chance, and the UN could probably do that. But more importantly, it has to be invited to do that. The UN cannot be there without the invitation of the Sri Lankan government. So, in conclusion, as I said, the UN should continue. It is an excellent organization. As somebody rightly pointed out this morning, it has survived so long, unlike its predecessor, the League of Nations. I'm positive that we will meet here to celebrate its centenary celebrations. And I hope that will be a befitting tribute to the memory of Sir Ramasamy Mudaliar, who was the Indian delegate in the founding of the United Nations. Thank you.